So I'm an entomologist, and I've actually professionally been an entomologist since August 1980 when I first joined the faculty here. So an entomologist literally is an individual who studies insects, and there are all kinds of different ways to be an entomologist. Technically, I guess I could be considered an insect ecologist because I'm interested in studying the distribution and abundance of insects and how that distribution abundance came to be. Understanding insect ecology also involves understanding a lot about insect behavior and insect physiology and even insect molecular biology and genomics these days. I was an undergraduate at Yale University and actually wasn't particularly interested in insects. Actually, I was afraid of insects. But when I got to college, I placed out of introductory biology. So I was allowed to take an upper level course my second semester freshman year, and literally the only course that fit my schedule was one called terrestrial arthropods. And I knew that had something to do with insects, but I thought, all right, fear stems from ignorance. I'll take a course. I'll learn which ones I should be afraid of. And the course was so incredibly fascinating, then here I am today. So it's all due to a gap in my schedule and an AP score of 5. My first project when I came to the University of Illinois was basically just a mile or so from my house. In fact, the main focus of my graduate dissertation research was within walking distance of the lab. I'm not a happy driver. I'm not a really happy traveler under most circumstances. And it turns out that an interaction between sort of nondescript little brown moth and a roadside weed has turned out to provide all kinds of insights. The Tyler Prize recognized sort of a lot of the activities I've been involved in that relate to helping people understand insects better. In some cases, the misunderstandings arise from misperceptions about the dangers that insects present to humans. In other cases, the misperceptions arise from dangers that are presented by the ways we have chosen to deal with those insects. So really to improve understanding among the general public of this creatures that basically run this planet. About 80% of all living things are insects. The Earth couldn't survive the way it's constructed without insects. A lot of people don't really appreciate their positive contributions, and they're all too aware of the negative impacts they have on humans.
Dr. Berenbaum, USDA, Agricultural Research Service.
Well, I first learned about this X-Files episode when I was reading TV Guide, and the blurb mentioned an entomologist, and I noticed that on the credit list she was listed as Dr. May Berenbaum, and I was astonished because this is not a very common name, and even some of my relatives don't spell it the same way that I do, and here it was listed there. So I watched the episode, and I first was enormously flattered that there was a Dr. May Berenbaum who was a total babe, but a lot of the dialogue sounded familiar and like stuff I'd written, and I really, really had to know how this came to be, whether this could conceivably have been a coincidence. And so it took me about a year to track down and get in touch with the scriptwriter, a guy named Darren Morgan, and it turns out that he had used my books as sort of source of background information, and when it came time to name a character, to come up with a plausible name for a female entomologist, he chose Berenbaum, and then Bambi was his own contributions. Being an entomologist is being a biologist, so I guess it's just on a smaller scale. You have to get used to the fact that a lot of particularly vertebrate biologists consider you to be somewhat less important or less relevant, which is kind of a shame because the premier model organism for the study of genetics happens to be an insect, the fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster. In total, 5 Nobel Prizes in medicine and physiology have been awarded for work on fruit flies. So we're not that different, really. And there are some unique aspects, but there are a lot of shared attributes that you can find in insects, you can find in all kinds of living things. I used to be afraid of insects, and it's true. There are a few really bad actors that can cause and have caused disease and destruction and contamination and all kinds of other bad things, but they are a tiny, tiny slice. I'd say collectively fewer than 10,000 of the 900,000 million or so species can be considered as at all pestiferous. So that's the 1%. So, let's occupy ourselves with the 99%, not the 1%.